Thank you so much for being with us. Let's start from the beginning. We all come to Davos with a certain list of stereotypes in our mind. I guess you came with your own expectation. What did you find here? Did you find here that surprised you, or that did not surprise you?
Yeah. Well, I mean, when I was invited to come to Davos, I did a lot of research about what happens here and all this kind of stuff. And the first thing I discovered is it's very hard to discover what happens here because not many people get to go, you know? So I think what surprised me the most about my experience at the World Economic Forum is that they respond to different ideas by actually bringing it in versus pushing it away. So there's something very seductive because they actually are craving new ideas, which I think is very much a surprise to me.
And on the contrary, is there something you say they are craving new ideas, absorbing them, but are they really listening?
I mean, that's the question. I think it is really difficult to know how much change is going to happen. On the other hand, I feel optimistic. I think that there's a kind of deep cynicism among activists that every single elite must just be, really not trying to actually create change and stuff like that. But in my interactions, I think that there are people who are sincerely trying to create change, especially around climate change. And so I'm optimistic.
You were, you are part of a movement that really wanted to change capitalism. You are at the heart of capitalism here. And do you think you will be able to really change the system?
Okay, look, I'm going to be honest with you. I think that humanity faces an unprecedented crisis right now, the climate emergency, and that we have basically 10 years to mobilize hundreds of millions of people in the streets to do massive climate mitigation efforts like planting 1 trillion trees. So I think from an activist perspective, we are faced with a very difficult dilemma. I think that a lot of the political struggles that we've been engaged with for the last 300 years, the class war, the fight against the rich, is going to be put on the back burner as we try to mobilize hundreds of millions of people for climate action. And so it is very difficult to see that dilemma being faced, but I think that at this particular moment, the most important thing is to try to figure out some way to avoid a massive climate collapse. And so a lot of the political concerns that I was involved in the last decade and the activists have been pursuing for 300 years, I think it's time to kind of let them go temporarily.
And who did you meet here? And you thought, okay, this meeting is gonna make a difference. I was able to really convince someone here.
Yeah. Well, I think the most powerful meeting that we've had so far is at the World Economic Forum was, they facilitated a kind of closed door session between activists and industry, where we talked about the idea of is something like a united front possible where we can work together as adversaries, but work together on this greater goal of a massive climate mobilization. And I think the real outcome of that meeting for me was there's a tremendous hunger. There's a tremendous hunger to figure out some way, because I think that elites understand that they need activists, and I think activists are starting to understand that they also need elites. There's no way to build a mobilization of the scale necessary without these two sides somehow putting aside their differences temporarily. So that left me with a positive sense that there is a hunger to figure this out.
And among activists, I guess there is a debate going on. Yeah? You wrote before coming, I certainly am going to commit reputational suicide. Was that the word? And is this happening, or do you feel you're able to convince other activists that this might be the right way to go?
Yeah. Well, absolutely. I think coming here is in many ways a kind of reputational suicide. It's a reinvention of myself. But I think it's not about convincing activists. I think it's instead about interjecting a pressing question into the mind of every activist. So every activist on Earth right now, I think, has to be confronted with this choice, which is, if I'm serious about creating climate mobilization, and if I also understand strategically that the only way I'm going to do that is with the support of governments and elites, am I willing to basically mix up my strategy? Am I willing to put aside the strategy I've been pursuing for 300 years and do something new? And I think that the goal of me coming here is to get that question into the mind of every single activist so they can make their own personal choice, but at least we're debating that question as a movement.
So in a way, coming here is as much a message for other activists than for powerful CEOs. Do I get that right?
Right, I think so. I think it's both. I think that, for me, I'm an activist, so the most important thing for me to do is to speak to other activists. But I think it is also an opportunity for elites to look. We need them to stop suppressing climate protests. That's really what has to happen. They have to take a hands-off approach on climate protests, and in exchange, I think that activists have to kind of put aside their political critiques for a moment.
And in your conversations with political leaders and business leaders, did you notice a difference regarding climate change and the will to act?
No, I think that there is a massive consensus that we are in the midst of a climate emergency, and I think that is something that wasn't true a year ago, wasn't true 2 years ago. So I think that there is a fundamental change. I think the difference is the time remaining is so little that we could spend 2 or 3 years talking about it, and that could basically doom us. So I do think that the danger here is like there's a lot of interest in the conversation, but we need to see like some serious action before the next Davos. There needs to be some serious we need to be able to come to the next Davos and say, like, we actually accomplished planting, 500 billion trees or some ridiculous, unprecedented mobilization. So that's my concern, is that it'll just get kind of, like, discussed ad nauseum until we are basically doomed.
And at the same time, one of the stars of this forum was Donald Trump, who said, I don't want to listen to prophets of doom regarding the climate. And isn't it very surprising what you're saying? At the same time, there is a huge concern, and then you have the president of the United States coming and saying that kind of things.
Look, let's be fair. He also embraced the Trillion Tree campaign, which I think is, something that's really important. So it's easy to hate on Donald Trump and everything, but sometimes he says the truth, which is, let's plant 1 trillion trees. So, I'm down with that. If he's serious about planting 1 trillion trees, let's plant 1 trillion trees.
And in spite of all, this idea that activists and elite need to talk, don't you feel sometimes uncomfortable, walking around here, seeing all the limousines, the jets coming in, all these very powerful people, mostly male, white? How do you feel as a person?
Yeah. Well, I think the most important thing for me is to protect my revolutionary edge, my activist edge, and that means avoiding a lot of the luxury, the decadence. I haven't gone to any parties, nightcaps. I haven't actually seen the kind of, luxurious, fancy stuff that everyone talks about. I haven't done any of that stuff.
You spent your time on panels, working, discussing.
Yeah, been getting up at 5 a.m. and going to bed at 8 p.m. I'm intentionally avoiding all that kind of caviar and champagne experience.
Thank you very much.